So why would we do assigned area tasks when most people prefer to do a fixed task?
Because we get sick of picking everyone out of paddocks when the task setters get that distance wrong. And they're 100k short and everyone's in paddock 100k away. Well, we don't do it.
What Owen is trying to say is when there's a bit of uncertainty about the weather.
Or a performance spree.
So uncertain weather.
Or if you enjoy the strategy of an AAT rather than just following the leader like sheep.
Yes, or if you're an intelligent person who likes to use your intelligence. Where are you, Ross?
Well, something like that.
Like Ross. Okay,
Find a
so
more distant paddock.
the main reason for using AATs is where the weather is uncertain, especially when there's thunderstorms around, and you've got some flexibility by making these circles bigger. You've got some flexibility to avoid the big thunderstorms or whatever it is, rain that's in these areas, rain here perhaps. So you can avoid, to some extent, you can avoid bad weather.
And performance spree. Performance spree.
That's the other reason, performance spree. And yet, well, I guess with uncertain weather too, it's not only thunderstorms, it's also where it's difficult to predict how strong the day is going to be. So if it's going to be a 4-knot day, you know you can do 80 or 90 kilometres an hour, and therefore in 3 hours you can go so far, 270 kilometres. But if the day doesn't produce 4-knot climbs, only 2-knot climbs, you're only going to get 70 kilometres per hour. So your 270 kilometres is going to take you 3.5 hours, 4 hours. Okay, so that's the weather, the uncertainty in the weather. Of course, for our state comps, we have a big range of glider performances and, I suppose, pilot performances. So the way to accommodate that big range of glider performances, particularly in the state comps, is to use assigned area tasks where we set a minimum time. So a characteristic of a assigned area task, AAT, is a minimum time and these assigned areas. For example, big circles. What does minimum time mean?
You don't want to finish before that time, or you penalise.
You don't want to finish before that time? Anything else?
You're not penalised for finishing after the time.
You can finish after that time? Yes. What happens if you finish before that time?
Penalised.
Well, no, I mean your time is written down at the minimum time. So how the time travel is divided by the minimum time.
Yeah. So if it's 3 hours and you finish in 2.5 hours, then in 2.5 hours you've done a distance of 250 kilometres, 100 kilometres an hour. But instead of giving you 250 kilometres in 3 hours, in 2.5 hours, you're taking as 250 kilometres in 3 hours. So instead of being 100 kilometres an hour, it's, I don't know, whatever it is, 80 kilometres an hour. So you don't want to come in under time. Do you have to come in on time? No. So why come in on time? Why come in with this much to spare and run the risk of coming in under time? So,
Greg, what's the consequences of someone completing the course the furthest distance and still coming in under time?
okay, well if the task setters have underestimated the maximum speed for the day, then some poor fellow might go right out to this edge here, right out to this edge here, and come back in 2 3/4 hours, 2 hours 45, which is less than 3 hours, if it was 3 hours. So because he's gone as far as he can anyway, he gets scored on 2 hours 45. So in our state comps rules, I think it's in the rules, but we've been doing it. If you go within a few percent of the maximum distance, then you get scored on your actual time, even if it's less than the minimum time. Okay. Now we all like to do fixed tasks. So one way of having a fixed task, more or less, and having an AAT task is to use a funny wedge, whereby if that's the direction of the task, we have a 500 metre radius circle here, or 1 kilometre sometimes. But here we have 500 metres or 1 kilometre, but we also have a big long skinny wedge up here. So what that means is the blokes who are going to, or the pilots who are going to go the maximum distance can do a fixed task. Start line, finish circle. They can do a fixed task, but the pilots in lesser performing gliders, or if they've had a bad day, they can come home from here or here. So the blokes that really want to have a fixed racing task can have that, and anybody who can't do that speed goes a bit slower but comes back around about 3 hours, 3 1/4, 3.5 hours.
Why is it called a Beecroft wedge?
I think you called it a Beecroft wedge. I wasn't sure if it was an insult or not, but
There must be a bit of history, you must have brought it back from somewhere.
no, this is something we invented for the Beverley State Comps a few years ago. But it hasn't really caught on with, when the state comps for other clubs, it hasn't caught on so far. Hopefully it will. Because it is...
an easier way of getting your time right, doesn't it? You know.
No, you don't get your time right. You get your time about right, but over.
Yeah.
You're never looking to get your time right.
Yeah.
There is no right time.
As against going around these cylinders, you might misjudge it now after too late.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It does make it easier to come back in 3 1/4 hours instead of 4 hours. Yeah.
It is a very hard navigation exercise, though, for some.
I don't agree.
What I mean, I love it.
You didn't, you went in my cockpit then when I went right to, just short of the turn point, and I got scored with the beginning where I entered it, because I came out the side of it, so I never got the full distance.
Well, look, Daryl,
Because
navigation is tricky, I know.
because, yeah, especially if you choose to turn just before the turn point.
Well,
What do you say, what did they do?
XC saw panels are very
Darryl was saying that his normal track penalises him. You know how he flies. And one day he didn't wind it back into the sector near the turn point.
Oh.
So it took him as having left the sector here, even though he almost did the whole task.
So be careful, everyone.
Yeah, you've got to keep that in mind. You can, I mean, what Darryl says is quite right. You do have to think about it.
Would it be better to have a rectangle instead of a wedge?
No, the software doesn't like rectangles. But of course, all you have to do to be sure that you go within the wedge here is make sure you're on that side of the task line. So if you keep on that side of the task line at about the time you're going to turn, you can't go wrong.
I was being too smart.
But if you can get your turn point, you should be able to get that.
Yes, it's really not that hard. And you can look at, often you'll get a town in here somewhere. You can make reference to towns or other landmarks to make sure that you do turn within the sector. Rightio. Any other comments or questions on AATs? They are a bit tricky to set up in your flight computers, but you do need to practice it and work out how to do it. Ask someone for help.
Yeah, do you take wind into account when you planning it? When you're deciding, let's say it's one with circles. And
With bigger
doesn't
circles.
matter where the wind's coming from. But do you decide to go further into the circle depending on the wind or not?
Yes. Yes. Okay, well this wedge system is basically a fixed task, but people are allowed to cut short. That's what it means. But for a normal AAT, like we'd find at the Nationals, or like we might find at the state comps where there's thunderstorm risks and, you know, you need to give people more flexibility about where to go, then we would have these big circles. If the wind is strongly in this direction, you know, 12, 15 knots or more, then you would try to minimise your distance downwind. So you try and turn here somewhere, but maximise the distance across wind. So you might do a task that's something like that, or maybe something like this. So you might actually do a task that looks like that. So that gives you the minimum distance downwind and into wind. If the wind's in this direction, then you want to pick your turn points out here and out here, like that. So that you can get enough distance in the task, but minimise your entry into wind.
So do you minimise into wind and downwind? And maximise your crosswind legs?
Well, yes, you're trying to minimise the distance into wind. I mean, whatever you go into wind, you then pick up going downwind. But of course, the two don't balance out. You lose more going into wind than you gain going downwind, unfortunately.
Because I think your first statement was to minimise going downwind. Is that right?
Well, if the wind's in this direction, that's downwind, isn't it?
Yeah.
You minimise going downwind because then you're minimising the distance you've got to go
Back
into wind to make up for it.
Okay.
So you're minimising your along wind distance, maximising your crosswind distance. The exception would be if it's a Q day. If it's a Q day, then you might be better off going a long way downwind and into wind because then you can get a lot of streeting. So in the blue, you'd want to on blue days, you'd want to minimise the downwind distance or into wind distance. On a Q day, as long as you're sure you're going to have Qs, you might want to maximise that so that you can do lots of streeting and therefore less thermaling.
I don't understand why you're trying to maximise under those conditions that your crosswind leg.
Okay, let's say you've got a it's a 6 knot thermal day, so you've got 6 knots. That's going to give you a cross-country speed of what?
My old piece of junk, 60 knots on a good day. No, I don't know, 60 knots.
100 kilometres per hour. Faster in a more modern glider or faster if you've got water ballast. But about 100 kilometres an hour in my Cirrus that I used to fly. Now, if you've got a wind of 20 knots, 20 knot wind equals almost 40 kilometres per hour, let's call it 40 kilometres per hour. So if you want to do 100 kilometres per hour downwind and back, it's going to take you, you're going to do 140 kilometres an hour downwind. So that 100 kilometres is going to take you, I don't know, 45 minutes. 45 minutes. Coming back into wind, you're going to do 60 kilometres an hour. So it's going to take you an hour and a half. So it's going to take you, 90 minutes. So total is 105 minutes.
So
135 minutes. 135 minutes, or 2 hours and 15. If there was no wind, it would have taken you 2 hours. So going up and down wind costs you speed, unless you can get streeting and you don't have to thermal so much. You can get streeting any day, but of course on a blue day you can't stay in it for very long. On a Q day you can stay in it for a long time, potentially.
So actually that's an interesting trade-off. I mean, how much stream do you actually need to actually make up for that downwind, upwind component?
Not a lot, really. Well, it depends on the wind, how strong the wind is. You've always got to make a decision on, let's say before you've taken off, you've decided that your turn points are likely to be here and here. So, the other stuff. Let's say there's no wind today. Sorry, your turn points are going to be here and here. Is that a good selection of turn points in your flight plan? In theory, it's the right distance for the day. It'll get you back in 3 hours 15, 3 hours 30. So everything looks good. Is that a good choice of turn points for you? That's right. The problem with that, because we're going this way still, the problem with that is that once you've turned here, if conditions get better than you thought, you're going to run out of distance. And you're not going to get the compensation because you haven't gone the maximum distance up here. So you're going to run out of distance down here. So you've got no flexibility, as Darryl said. So that's not a good choice. What you really want to do is have a turn point down here that's perhaps somewhere there. So you've got plenty of flexibility this way, a little bit of flexibility that way. Yeah, somewhere there. So you can plan on a turn point up here. So that suits the ideal or the predicted conditions. As you're going up here, you're going to know that it's better or worse or the same. If it's better, you know you've got this extra distance down here. So you might go to the edge of this circle, just in case you end up coming in under time, having done the maximum. So you might go to the edge of this circle, and then you've got all this extra distance down here. And in fact, if you end up with 6-knot climbs everywhere and lots of streeting, and you're going to bust it, then you can just go to the edge somewhere down here and get the maximum distance roughly, and you're okay. But if you haven't gone far enough into here, then you've lost your flexibility. So you might come in under time and start losing speed as a result. So you've got to allow for some flexibility in your selection of turn points. Now, as you're going along here, you say, well, I'm only getting 3-knot climbs, I expected to get 4-knot climbs. Therefore, this turn point might make me go too far, might be giving me 4 hours. So it's really weak conditions, nowhere near as good as expected, because, I don't know, who was doing the weather? No. Okay, the weather forecast wasn't very good. So you might decide you're going to turn here and head for that point. You've still got flexibility, but now at least you're not going to be taking 4 or 5 hours and outland. You're going to be coming in a bit over 3 hours. So you need to think about that flexibility as well. Yes, Mr. Jones?
Go back to the wedge. If we're flying a wedge, the modern day flight computers will tell you when to turn for home, won't they?
We'll get on the flight computers, but yes, your flight computer will tell you based on the task you've put into it. So if you put this task in, and you've told it you're going to get a 4-knot climb rate for the rest of the task, it'll tell you what time you're going to get home, yes.
But it relies on you telling it the rate of climb for the last bit.
It relies on you forecasting the rate of climb for the remainder of the task. And it relies on the wind that it's calculated during during your climbs. It's calculated the wind speed and direction. So if the wind's going to change, that could throw it out. Or if you've told it the wrong climb rate for the remainder of the task, that will throw it out. Or if you get a lot of streeting on the way home and get home quicker, that will throw it out.
How does it know how fast I'm going to fly on the final leg?
You've told it the climb rate, therefore it knows how fast you're going to cruise, knows how much time you're going to spend climbing and cruising, knows when you're going to get home. It comes from the stuff we looked at last week.